So at this point, our tile map editor is done. The one thing we haven't tested though is what happens if we create a new tile map. Let's delete this one from our project and start over again. From the Game Object menu, we'll select our tile map option, select it in the hierarchy, and set the dorm tiles as its texture 2D. Unfortunately, nothing happens, and that's because we have a little bit of a bug. Let's go into the console and take a look at what's happening. You'll see some warnings and some errors, but the main one we want to focus on is this error here that has a null reference inside of our tile map. If we double click on it, we can take a look at what's happening. We're taken to line 16 of our tile map, and it looks like we're trying to access the current tile brush, but the sprite references aren't set yet. We can fix this in the tile map editor. Let's go into our onInspector GUI method, where we set the map's texture 2D from the object field. We have a similar problem that we had with the map size on the lines above. What we need to do is track the old texture 2D and see if something has changed when we set a new texture 2D, and then force the tile map to redo the calculations as well as create a new brush. Let's create a variable called old texture, and we'll set this to the map's current texture value. Below this, we'll test if the old texture is not equal to the map's texture. Inside of this method, we'll call the update calculations method. This will now populate the sprite references inside of our tile map. Next, we're going to need to tell the map which tile ID to start on. Now, if you remember back to when we were setting up the sprite references, when we load them from the asset folder, the first item in that array is always going to be the main texture itself. So for us to get the first tile that we want, we're going to need to set that value to 1. And finally, we can create our brush. Once we have this in place, everything else should work as expected. We'll check to see if the texture 2D is set to null, and if it's not, we'll go ahead and it'll update the brush automatically. Let's save our code, go back into Unity, delete our tile map, clear out the console, and create a new tile map. From there, we'll select our dorm tiles, and you'll see that we now have a brush. If we give focus back to the tile picker, it'll also update and show us the tile we have selected. Now let's draw a quick map, and I'll show off how each of the tiles work. Let's change the map size to 10 by 6. We'll start with this tile which represents the background. Here we can just draw out the background for the entire map. Next we'll go with the ground tile. These 4 ground tiles represent variations of the same tile type. If we simply draw the first one across, we can swap out random tiles to give a little bit more variety to the pattern on the floor. Next, we'll go with the borders. We'll start with a left border, and we'll start with a right border. At this point, you might actually notice something. If we selected a tile like the door, all of a sudden we're no longer getting the preview of our brush. What's happening is that the brush's game object and its renderer's layer order is set to the same value as the tiles we're creating. So in essence, these tiles are showing up on top of our brush. Let's switch back over to our tile map editor and fix this. We're going to scroll down to where we create our brush. And right after we set the brush's renderer 2D, we're going to set the renderer 2D sorting order to 1000. This way we'll make sure that it shows up high above any of the other sprites that we have in the scene. Let's save our code and go back to Unity. Now you'll see our brush appears above everything else. Let's finish creating the floor border, and then we can put some doors in place. Next, we'll do the ceiling, and we'll create a platform. I also included a tile for a single platform, and there's a single floorboard as well to go above that tile. So here we have a completed map. The other thing to note is that while our tile map editor is done for this course, the things that we didn't get time to do are adding collisions and other attributes to each of our tiles. If you go into the tile map editor and select the tiles, you can choose a single tile, like the first one here, and add a box collider to it. Remember, each of the tiles are simply game objects, so you can extend this tile map editor to add other attributes or components or behaviors to each tile as you paint them down. All you need to do is build the UI inside of the tile picker to help you make it happen. And now, with a solid foundation of a tile map editor, you can customize this for the game that you want to build.